Chapter 1: The Creak. The insistent creak echoed through Sector 4, a sound Aris Thorne had come to associate with impending doom. Not dramatic, Hollywood-style doom, but the slow, insidious decay that threatened to consume Station Tritan. He tightened the wrench on the pressure regulator, the metal cold against his gloved hand. The gauge flickered erratically, a nervous pulse in the artificial light. Reading, unstable Thorne, Lena Hansen's voice crackled over the comms. Pressure fluctuating in Module C7. Nominal is 8,000 psi. We're hitting peaks of 8,300. I see it, Lena, Aris replied, his voice strained. He ran a diagnostic check on the regulator, the results flashing across his visor display. Nothing obvious, just another symptom of Triton's slow death. Recalibrating now. Keep an eye on the sensors. He spared a glance at the reinforced viewport. The inky blackness of the Mariana Trench pressed against the thick acrylic, a silent, suffocating presence. He sometimes imagined he could see shapes moving out there, colossal and unknowable. The pressure itself was a tangible enemy, a relentless force trying to crush them all. Aris moved to the next regulator in the series, the creak growing louder. It wasn't just the metal complaining. It was the entire structure groaning under the strain. Station Tritan, built decades ago, was nearing its breaking point. The evacuation order should have come weeks ago, but bureaucratic delays and a stubborn captain Lee kept them tethered to the bottom of the ocean. He adjusted the second regulator, the pressure stabilizing slightly. Lena's voice returned, less frantic this time. Readings are leveling out, Thorne. Good work. What caused the spike? Not sure, Aris admitted. Could be a microfracture in the hull, sediment buildup in the system, or the station deciding it's had enough. Take your pick. Lena chuckled nervously. Let's go with sediment buildup, less existential. Aris wished he shared her optimism. He finished his rounds in Sector 4, checking the life support systems, the emergency power generators, and the increasingly unreliable communication arrays. Every system showed signs of wear and tear, patched together with temporary fixes and sheer willpower. He moved towards the central hub, passing through the hydroponics lab. Eva Rostova hovered over a tank of bioluminescent algae, her face illuminated by an ethereal glow. She barely glanced up as he passed. "Anything interesting, Eva?" Aris asked. "Always," she replied, her voice distant. "These cultures are adapting to the pressure changes, developing new characteristics." Aris didn't pry. Eva's fascination with the deep-sea life bordered on obsession. She saw beauty where he saw only danger. She was searching for something in the abyss, something he suspected was best left undisturbed. He reached the central hub, the heart of Station Tritan. Captain Lee stood before a holographic display of the station's schematics, her brow furrowed. Kenji Tanaka, the station's technician, stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "Aris," Captain Lee acknowledged, her voice curt. "Report." "Sector 4 stabilized, Captain," Aris replied. "Pressure spike contained, but the creaking is getting worse. I recommend we run a full structural analysis." "We're aware of the creaking, Thorne," Lee snapped. Tanaka is already running diagnostics. What is the status of the emergency power grid? Holding but barely, Aris said. The generators are running at maximum capacity. We lose one, we lose everything. Lee turned to Tanaka. Any progress on the power fluctuations? Tanaka shrugged, his eyes fixed on the display. Intermittent surges, difficult to pinpoint the source, could be anything. Aris distrusted Tanaka. The technician was competent but secretive, always lurking in the shadows. Rumors circulated about his involvement in black market dealings, using Tritan as a base of operations. Aris suspected he knew more than he let on about the station's problems. I want a full report on my desk within the hour, Tanaka, Lee ordered. And I want solutions, not excuses. Tanaka nodded silently and returned to his console. Lee turned back to Aris, her gaze intense. The surface is still delaying the evacuation order, she said, her voice low. They claim they need more data, more analysis. They don't understand what's happening down here. They never do, Captain, Aris said. He'd seen this before, the disconnect between the surface dwellers and those who lived and worked in the extreme environments. The higher-ups saw them as expendable resources, numbers on a spreadsheet. Lee sighed, running a hand through her short, cropped hair. We need to prove to them that the situation is critical. We need concrete evidence. I'll do what I can, Captain, Aris said, but I can't guarantee how much longer this station will hold. Make it long enough, Thorne, Lee said, her voice hard. Make it long enough. Aris left the central hub, the weight of the station pressing down on him. He passed by the mess hall, the aroma of Benny Alvarez's cooking doing little to lift his spirits. He spotted Ricky Gomez, the ROV pilot, hunched over a plate of something unidentifiable, his face pale. "You okay, Ricky?" Aris asked. Ricky jumped, startled. "Oh, yeah, Dr. Thorne, just not feeling so great." "The pressure getting to you?" Aris asked. Ricky nodded. "I keep seeing things out there, in the dark, things that aren't supposed to be there." "The trench plays tricks on your eyes, kid," Aris said, trying to reassure him. "It's just the darkness and the isolation." "I don't think so, sir," Ricky said, his voice trembling. "I saw something. Big, something with lights, and it was watching me." Aris placed a hand on Ricky's shoulder. "Get some rest, Ricky. You'll feel better in the morning." He doubted it. The trench wasn't just playing tricks on Ricky's eyes. It was getting into his head. It was getting into all of their heads. The darkness, the pressure, the isolation, they were all conspiring to drive them mad. Aris continued to his quarters, a small, cramped space that offered little comfort. He stripped off his coveralls, the chill of the recycled air raising goosebumps on his skin. He splashed water on his face, staring at his reflection in the small mirror. He looked tired, older than his years. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by stress and sleepless nights. He thought of Ingrid, his former supervisor, the one who had convinced him to take this job. She had seen potential in him, a talent for engineering that he himself had doubted. She had disappeared months ago during a routine maintenance run outside the station. Her body had never been found. Aris blamed himself for her death. He had been the one who had signed off on the maintenance schedule, the one who had failed to notice the subtle warning signs. Her loss haunted him, a constant reminder of his own fallibility. He lay down on the narrow bunk, closing his eyes, but sleep eluded him. The creaking of the station filled his ears, a mournful symphony of decay. He imagined the hull cracking, the water rushing in, the crushing pressure obliterating everything. He opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something more than just the station's structural problems. Something was happening down here, something sinister and unknowable. He got out of bed, pulling on his coveralls. He needed to do something, anything, to escape the oppressive dread that was consuming him. He decided to check the external sensors, see if he could spot anything unusual in the surrounding waters. He made his way to the sensor array, a small room located on the outer edge of the station. He powered up the system, the screens flickering to life. He scanned the surrounding waters, the sonar pings echoing into the abyss. Nothing, just the blackness, the cold, the silence. He zoomed in on a faint reading, a blip on the edge of the sensor range. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He enhanced the image, trying to get a clearer picture. The blip resolved into a shape, a dark, elongated form moving slowly towards the station. It was too large to be any known sea creature. It was something else, something alien. As Eris watched, the shape began to emit a series of rhythmic pulses, a strange, hypnotic signal that resonated deep within his skull. The creaking of the station intensified, the metal groaning in protest. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the sensor array into darkness. The emergency lights kicked in, casting long, distorted shadows. Eris stumbled backwards, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew with a chilling certainty that they were no longer alone. Something had found them, and it was coming closer. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Deep. Darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. The emergency lights cast a sickly green glow, painting the sensor array in grotesque shadows. Eris fumbled for the comm unit, his fingers clumsy with fear. "Captain Lee, this is Thorn. We have a situation. Unknown object approaching the station. Sector 7 sensor array, all lights are gone." Static crackled in his ear, followed by a garbled response. "Thorn, repeat. Interference." The signal was breaking up. Whatever was out there was interfering with their communications. Eris tried again, shouting into the comm. "Captain, I repeat, unknown object approaching. It's big, and it's emitting some kind of signal." This time there was no response, only static. Eris slammed his fist against the console in frustration. They were cut off. He turned back to the sensor screens, the faint image of the approaching object still visible. It was closer now, its shape more defined. It resembled nothing he had ever seen before. It was long and serpentine, with multiple appendages and a surface that seemed to shimmer and shift in the darkness. And it was getting closer. He had to warn the others. He grabbed his emergency flare gun and a flashlight and bolted from the sensor array, heading towards the central hub. The corridors of the station were eerily silent. the usual hum of the machinery replaced by a low, guttural vibration that resonated through the metal walls. As he ran, he heard whispers, faint and indistinct, like voices carried on the wind. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, malevolent and mocking. He stopped, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He was alone, or at least he thought he was. He continued on, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, swirling around him like a vortex of madness. He reached the central hub, the door sealed shut. He pounded on the metal, shouting for Captain Lee. "Captain, open up. We have a situation." The door hissed open, and Captain Lee stood before him, her face grim. Kenji Tanaka stood behind her, his expression inscrutable. "What's going on, Thorne?" Lee demanded. "I lost contact with the sensor array. What was that about an unknown object?" "It's out there, Captain," Aris said, his voice urgent. "Something big, something we've never seen before. It's approaching the station and it's interfering with our communications." Lee's eyes narrowed. "Show me." Aris led them back to the sensor array, his flashlight beam illuminating the way. The whispers followed them, growing louder with each step. They reached the sensor array, the screen still dark. Aris reactivated the system, the emergency lights flickering to life. The image of the approaching object reappeared on the screens, now much closer. Lee stared at the image, her face pale. "What in God's name is that?" "I don't know, Captain," Aris said, "but I don't think it's friendly." Tanaka stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the screens. "It's emitting a strong electromagnetic pulse," he said. "That's what's interfering with our communications. It's also overloading the power grid." "Can you block it?" Lee asked. Tanaka shook his head. "Not with our current equipment. We'd need a Faraday cage, something we don't have." "What does it want?" Lee asked, her voice barely a whisper. As if in answer, the object began to emit a series of loud, resonant tones, a sonic blast that shook the entire station. The lights flickered violently, and the emergency generators sputtered. "It's attacking us," Aris shouted. "We need to shut down all non-essential systems, divert power to the shields." Lee snapped into action. "Tanaka, get to the power core. Divert all available power to the shields. Thorne, get to the armory. Distribute weapons to the crew." Aris nodded and turned to leave, but stopped as he heard a scream. It came from the hydroponics lab just down the corridor. "Eva," Aris shouted, "what's going on?" There was no response, only more screams. Aris grabbed his flare gun and ran towards the hydroponics lab. Lee and Tanaka closed behind. He reached the lab, the door open. He stepped inside, his flare gun raised. The scene that greeted him was one of utter horror. Eva Rostova lay on the floor, her body contorted at unnatural angles. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her mouth was open in a silent scream. The bioluminescent algae tanks had shattered, the glowing liquid spreading across the floor. And standing in the middle of the mess, bathed in the eerie light, was a creature unlike anything Aris had ever seen. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was pale and translucent, revealing the pulsating organs beneath. Its eyes were large and black, devoid of pupils, and its mouth was a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was one of the pressure mines, and it was feeding on Eva's life force. Aris raised his flare gun and fired. The flare struck the creature in the chest, igniting its translucent skin. The creature shrieked in agony, its body convulsing. It turned towards Aris, its black eyes burning with hatred. It raised a hand, and Aris felt a sharp pain in his head. He staggered backwards, his vision blurring. He heard Lee shout something, followed by the sound of gunfire. He saw Tanaka raise his weapon and fire at the creature. The creature ignored the bullets, its attention fixed on Aris. It took a step towards him, its mouth opening wider, revealing its rows of razor-sharp teeth. Aris knew he was going to die. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But the end never came. He heard a loud splash, followed by a series of gurgling sounds. He opened his eyes and saw the creature thrashing wildly, its body entangled in the algae. Eva Rostova, her eyes glazed over, had risen to her feet. With unnatural strength, she dragged the creature into the shattered remains of an algae tank. The creature screamed, its body dissolving in the glowing liquid. Within seconds it was gone, leaving only a swirling mass of algae and a lingering stench of decay. Eva stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the empty tank. She turned towards Aris, her face blank. "It's here," she whispered, her voice hollow. "It's inside us all." Chapter 3: The Infection Spreads. Eva's words hung in the air, chilling Aris to the bone. He stared at her, trying to discern if she was still herself, or if the creature's influence had already taken hold. Her eyes were vacant, her expression devoid of emotion. She was a puppet, a shell inhabited by something alien. "Eva," Aris said cautiously, taking a step towards her. "Are you all right? What was that thing?" She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond him. Lee approached cautiously, her weapon raised. Tanaka remained near the door, his face pale and clammy. "Rostova," Lee said, her voice firm. "Can you hear me? What happened?" Eva blinked slowly, as if emerging from a deep trance. I don't know," she stammered, her voice weak. "It was inside my head. It showed me things, terrible things." "What things?" Aris pressed, his hand resting on his flare gun. "Darkness," she whispered. "Endless darkness and voices whispering my name." The whispers, Aris had heard them too. He glanced at Lee, a silent question passing between them. Was this connected to the approaching object? Was it a form of psychic attack? "Tanaka," Lee ordered. "Get Rostova to medical. Dr. Sharma needs to examine her immediately." Tanaka nodded and gently guided Eva out of the hydroponics lab. She moved like a sleepwalker, her eyes still glazed over. Lee turned to Aris, her face etched with concern. "What do you make of this, Thorn?" "I don't know, Captain," Aris admitted. "But I don't like it, that creature. It wasn't just trying to kill her. It was trying to control her." "Control her how?" Lee asked. "I don't know," Aris repeated. "But I felt it too, Captain, that presence. It was inside my head trying to influence my thoughts." Lee rubbed her temples, her expression troubled. This is getting out of hand. We need to contain this before it spreads. How, Captain? Eris asked. We're cut off from the surface. We have an unknown object bearing down on us, and now we have psychic monsters running around the station. We do what we always do, Thorn, Lee said, her voice hardening. We adapt, we survive, we fight back. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the shattered lab, the glowing algae, the lingering stench of decay. First, we quarantine the medical bay. No one goes in or out without authorization. Second, we increase security patrols throughout the station. I want every corner checked, every vent sealed. Third, we find that thing out there and we destroy it. And what about Ristova? Eris asked. What if she's already infected? Sharma will run tests, Lee said. If she shows any signs of being compromised, we'll take the necessary precautions. Eris didn't like the sound of that. He knew what necessary precautions meant. It meant isolation, confinement, and possibly worse. He hoped it wouldn't come to that. He had a feeling that Eva was the key to understanding what was happening, and they couldn't afford to lose her. They left the hydroponics lab, the whispers following them. As they walked, Eris noticed a change in the station. The lights flickered more frequently, the vibrations grew stronger, and the air seemed to grow colder. The station itself was reacting to the presence of the unknown. They reached the central hub, finding Ricky Gomez huddled in a corner, his face buried in his hands. Ricky, Eris said, kneeling beside him. What's wrong? Ricky looked up, his eyes wide with terror. I saw it again, Dr. Thorne, he stammered. Out the viewport, that thing. It was right outside, staring at me. It's all right, Ricky, Eris said, trying to reassure him. It can't get in here. It's inside my head, Dr. Thorne, Ricky whispered. It's showing me things, horrible things, things that are going to happen. Eris exchanged a worried glance with Lee. The infection was spreading, and it was happening fast. Ricky, Lee said, her voice gentle, I need you to tell me what you saw. What did it show you? Ricky hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. I can't, Captain, he whispered. It'll make it happen. It'll make it real. Ricky, you need to trust us, Lee said. We can help you, but you need to tell us what you saw. Ricky took a deep breath, his body trembling. I saw the station collapsing, the water rushing in, everyone drowning, and then I saw something else, something worse. What was worse, Ricky? Eris asked, his voice low. Ricky's eyes filled with tears. I saw us, all of us, changed, twisted. We were like monsters, and we were killing each other. Lee and Eris exchanged another glance, their faces grim. Ricky had seen the future, and it was a future they had to prevent. All right, Ricky, Lee said, standing up. I need you to come with me. We're going to put you in a secure room where you'll be safe. Ricky nodded and allowed Lee to lead him away. Eris watched them go, his mind racing. They were losing control of the situation. The unknown object was closing in, the infection was spreading, and the crew was descending into madness. He knew what he had to do. He had to find a way to fight back, to protect the station and its crew. He had to find a way to stop the pressure. He made his way to the armory, his hand resting on his flare gun. He didn't know what he was going to find there, but he knew it wouldn't be good. He reached the armory, the door locked. He entered the security code and stepped inside. The armory was small and cramped, filled with weapons and ammunition. He saw Mac O'Connell, the veteran deep-sea welder, standing guard, his face pale and drawn. "Mac," Aris said, "what's the situation?" "It's getting worse, Doc," Mac said, his voice trembling. "I heard those whispers. They're driving me crazy." "I know, Mac," Aris said. "We have to stay strong, we have to fight back." "Fight what, Doc?" Mac asked. "We can't fight what we can't see. We're trapped down here and there's nothing we can do." "There's always something we can do, Mac," Aris said, his voice firm. "We can fight for our survival. We can fight for our sanity. We can fight for each other." He grabbed a rifle and a handful of ammunition. "We're going to find that thing out there, Mac," he said, "and we're going to destroy it." Mac stared at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "All right, Doc," he said. "I'm with you. Let's do this." Aris nodded, his grip tightening on the rifle. He didn't know what they were facing, but he knew they had to stand together. They had to fight back against the darkness, against the pressure, against the unknown. Their survival depended on it. Chapter 4: The Hunt Begins. Aris and Mac left the armory, armed and determined. The whispers continued to plague them, a constant reminder of the unseen enemy that lurked in the depths. "Where do we start, Doc?" Mac asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We start with the exterior cameras," Aris replied. "See if we can get a visual on that thing. If we know what we're dealing with, we have a better chance of fighting it." They made their way to the observation deck, a small room with a panoramic viewport that offered a breathtaking view of the Mariana Trench. Or, at least, it used to. Now, it offered only a view of impenetrable darkness. Aris activated the exterior cameras, the screens flickering to life. The images were grainy and distorted, but they showed the surrounding waters in real time. "Anything?" Mac asked, peering at the screens. "Nothing yet," Aris said, scanning the images. "Just the usual. Wait, what's that?" He zoomed in on a faint anomaly, a dark shape moving in the distance. It was difficult to make out, but it seemed to be getting closer. "That's it, Doc," Mac said, his voice tense. "That's the thing Ricky saw." Aris watched as the shape grew larger, its form becoming more defined. It was long and serpentine, with multiple appendages and a surface that seemed to shimmer and shift in the darkness. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. "It's headed straight for us," Aris said, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We need to warn the others." He reached for the comm unit, but stopped as he heard a loud crash. It came from the other side of the observation deck. He turned towards the sound, his rifle raised. Mac followed close behind, his face pale and drawn. They cautiously approached the source of the noise, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. They reached a small storage room, the door hanging open. They stepped inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. The room was a mess, boxes and equipment scattered everywhere. And standing in the middle of the chaos was a figure that sent a shiver down Aris's spine. It was Dr. Vivian Holloway, the xenolinguist. But she was different. Her eyes were wide and vacant, her skin pale and clammy. She was muttering to herself in a language Eris didn't recognize. "Dr. Holloway," Eris said cautiously, "are you all right?" She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond him. She continued to mutter in the strange language, her voice growing louder, more frantic. "Dr. Holloway," Eris shouted, grabbing her by the shoulder. "Snap out of it, what's going on?" She turned to him, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. "It speaks," she said, her voice raspy and distorted. "It speaks through me." "What are you talking about?" Eris asked, his grip tightening on his rifle. "It wants to communicate," she said. "It wants to share its knowledge. It wants to show us the truth." "The truth about what?" Eris asked. "About everything," she said. "About the universe, about our place in it, about the coming darkness." She paused, her eyes widening. It says the pressure is rising. It says the station is doomed. It says we must embrace the change." "Embrace the change," Eris repeated, his brow furrowing. "What change?" "The transformation," she said, her voice growing louder, more intense. "The merging, the becoming one with the deep." She reached out to him, her fingers twitching. "Join us, Eris," she said. "Become one with the deep. Embrace the pressure." Eris recoiled, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what she was talking about. She was talking about the infection, the process of becoming one of the pressure minds. "I'm not going to let that happen," Eris said, his voice firm. "I'm not going to let you turn me into one of those things." "It's too late, Eris," she said, her voice filled with a chilling certainty. "It's already inside you. You can feel it, can't you? The whispers, the pressure, the darkness." Eris felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He could feel it, the subtle influence of the infection, the whispers growing louder in his mind. He had to fight it before it consumed him. "Mac," Eris said, his voice strained. "Get her out of here. Take her to medical now." Mac hesitated, his eyes darting between Eris and Dr. Holloway. "Are you sure, Doc?" he asked. "Just do it, Mac," Eris snapped. "I'll be all right." Mac nodded and grabbed Dr. Holloway by the arm, gently leading her out of the storage room. She didn't resist, her eyes still fixed on some unseen point beyond him. Eris watched them go, his mind racing. The infection was spreading faster than he had anticipated. They were running out of time. He turned back to the exterior cameras, the image of the approaching object still visible on the screens. It was closer now, its form looming large in the darkness. He had to do something, anything, to stop it. He couldn't let it reach the station, couldn't let it infect any more of the crew. He made a decision. He was going to go outside to meet the object head-on. It was a long shot, a suicide mission, but it was the only chance they had. He grabbed a diving suit and a high-powered harpoon gun from the storage room. He quickly donned the suit, sealing himself inside. He contacted Captain Lee on the comm unit, his voice trembling. "Captain, this is Thorne. I'm going outside." "Thorne, what are you talking about?" Lee demanded. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to try to stop that thing, Captain," Eris said. I'm going to meet it head-on before it reaches the station." "Thorn, that's insane," Lee shouted. "You can't do that, it's suicide." "Maybe," Aris said, "but it's the only chance we have. If I can destroy it, I can save the station. I can save the crew." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Tell Ingrid, tell her I tried my best." He disconnected the comm unit and opened the airlock. The cold, dark water of the Mariana Trench rushed in, engulfing him. He stepped out into the abyss, his harpoon gun raised. The pressure was immense, crushing him from all sides. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint beam of his flashlight. He swam towards the approaching object, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was facing death, but he wasn't afraid. He was fighting for something bigger than himself, for the survival of his crew, for the hope of a future. He saw the object looming before him, its form massive and terrifying. It was even larger than he had imagined, its surface shimmering and shifting in the darkness. It emitted a series of loud, resonant tones, a sonic blast that shook him to his core. He felt a sharp pain in his head, the influence of the infection growing stronger. He ignored the pain, focusing on his target. He raised his harpoon gun and fired. The harpoon struck the object in the center of its mass, piercing its shimmering surface. The object shrieked in agony, its body convulsing. It turned towards Aris, its form contorting in rage. It lunged at him, its appendages reaching out to grab him. Aris braced for the impact, knowing this could be the end. But he wasn't going to give up. He was going to fight to the very end. He was going to stop the pressure, even if it killed him. Chapter 5: Into the Abyss. The impact knocked the harpoon gun from Aris's grasp, sending it spinning into the inky blackness. The creature's appendages wrapped around him, constricting his suit. The pressure intensified, threatening to crush him. He struggled against its grip, but the creature was too strong. It pulled him closer, its shimmering surface pressing against his visor. He could see its interior now, a swirling mass of pulsating organs and alien structures. It was a living nightmare. The creature emitted a series of psychic pulses, flooding his mind with images of destruction and despair. He saw the station collapsing, the crew dying in agony, the entire world consumed by darkness. He fought against the visions, trying to maintain his sanity. He focused on Ingrid, on her smile, her laughter, her unwavering belief in him. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let the creature win. He reached for his combat knife, a small but deadly weapon strapped to his leg. He drew the blade and plunged it into the creature's flesh. The creature shrieked in pain, its grip loosening slightly. Aris seized the opportunity, wriggling free from its grasp. He kicked away from the creature, swimming backwards as fast as he could. The creature lunged at him again, its appendages flailing wildly. He dodged its attacks, his movements hampered by the pressure and the darkness. He knew he couldn't outrun it forever. He needed a plan, a way to defeat this thing. He remembered the harpoon gun. It was gone, lost in the abyss. But maybe he could use the harpoon itself. He turned back towards the creature, his eyes scanning the darkness. He saw the harpoon embedded in its flesh, glowing faintly in the dim light. He swam towards the harpoon, dodging the creature's attacks. He reached the harpoon and grabbed it, pulling it free from the creature's body. The creature roared in pain, its rage intensifying. It lunged at him again, its appendages closing in. Aris braced himself, raising the harpoon. He waited for the creature to get closer, closer, closer. And then he struck. He plunged the harpoon into the creature's eye, driving it deep into its brain. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing violently. It released its grip on Aris and thrashed wildly, its appendages flailing in all directions. Aris swam away as fast as he could, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the dying creature. The creature's death throes were catastrophic. It emitted a series of sonic blasts, powerful enough to shatter the surrounding rock formations. The water around him churned and boiled, the pressure fluctuating wildly. He was caught in the vortex, tossed and turned like a rag doll. He felt his suit tearing, the pressure increasing. He was going to be crushed. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But then, just as he was about to lose consciousness, the vortex subsided. He opened his eyes, his vision blurred. He was alive, but barely. His suit was damaged, his oxygen levels were low, and he was surrounded by debris. He needed to get back to the station, and fast. He activated his emergency beacon, hoping someone would find him before it was too late. He began to swim towards the station, his movements slow and labored. The pressure was immense, crushing him with every stroke. He saw the station in the distance, a faint glimmer of light in the darkness. It seemed so far away, almost unattainable. He swam on, his body aching, his lungs burning. He was losing hope, his will to survive waning. And then he saw them. Two figures were approaching him, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. It was Mac and Captain Lee. They had come to rescue him. He mustered the last of his strength and swam towards them. They reached him and pulled him close, their faces filled with relief. They towed him back to the station, their arms supporting him. He was exhausted, battered, and bruised, but he was alive. He had faced the creature in the abyss and he had survived. But he knew the fight was far from over. The infection was still spreading, the pressure was still rising, and the station was still doomed. He had bought them some time, but time was running out. They needed a miracle. Back at the station, Lee and Mac helped Aris get out of his suit and into the medical bay. He lay on the bed, shivering uncontrollably, as Dr. Sharma started running tests and connecting machines to him. "What happened out there, Aris?" Lee asked, standing near Sharma and watching. Aris started explaining everything that had occurred, and Sharma looked at him, with a face with disbelief and concern. The test concluded with a very concerning answer. "Aris, you are infected, but you are resisting, thanks to fighting it outside, and the diving suit, it looks like you are a slow carrier," Sharma says with a serious tone. "We have to move you into the quarantine zone." Chapter 6: Quarantine and Revelation. The word quarantine hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Aris stared at Dr. Sharma, his mind reeling. He was infected. Despite everything, despite facing the creature in the abyss, he had failed. "But I destroyed it," Aris stammered, his voice weak. "I killed the thing. How can I be infected?" "The infection isn't just from direct contact, Aris," Sharma explained, her voice gentle but firm. "It's also spread through the sonic pulses, through the psychic energy. You were exposed to a massive dose of it out there. It's a miracle you're still yourself." "What does slow carrier mean?" Lee asked, her voice sharp. "It means he's not fully transformed," Sharma said. "His mind is still his own, but the infection is present in his body. It's slowly changing him, altering his thoughts, his emotions, his very being. If we don't contain it, he'll eventually become one of them." "Can you cure it?" Lee asked. Sharma shook her head. "I don't know. We don't have the resources, the technology. All I can do is try to slow the progression to buy us some time." "How much time?" Eris asked, dread creeping into his voice. Sharma hesitated. "I can't say for sure. Maybe a few days, maybe a week. It depends on how strong your will is, how well you can resist the infection." A week. He had a week to live, a week to save the station, a week to say goodbye. "What about the others?" Eris asked. "How many more are infected?" "We don't know yet," Sharma said. "We're running tests on everyone, but the results are inconclusive. The infection is subtle, difficult to detect in its early stages." "We need to find them before it's too late," Eris said. "Before they turn into those things." "We will," Lee said, her voice resolute. "We'll quarantine anyone who shows symptoms, and we'll find a way to stop this infection. I promise you, Eris." Lee and Sharma helped Eris to the quarantine zone, a series of isolated rooms located on the far side of the station. The rooms were small and sterile, with minimal furnishings and reinforced doors. They were designed to contain highly contagious diseases or dangerous individuals. Now, they were his prison. They reached his assigned room, the door sliding open with a hiss. Eris stepped inside, his heart sinking. He was alone, cut off from the rest of the crew. "We'll check on you regularly, Eris," Lee said, her voice filled with concern. "And we'll bring you whatever you need, just try to stay strong." The door slid shut, leaving Eris in silence. He sat down on the narrow bunk, his head in his hands. He was infected, quarantined, and running out of time. The pressure was overwhelming. He lay back on the bunk, staring at the ceiling. The whispers began to grow louder, more insistent. They were inside his head now, taunting him, tempting him. "Join us, Eris. Embrace the change. Become one with the deep." He clenched his fists, trying to block out the voices. He wouldn't let them control him. He wouldn't let them turn him into a monster. He focused on Ingrid, on her memory, on her strength. He remembered her words, her unwavering belief in him. "You're stronger than you think, Eris," she had said. "You can overcome anything, just never give up." He wouldn't give up. He would fight the infection with every fiber of his being. He would find a way to save the station, even if it killed him. He got up from the bunk and began to pace the room, trying to clear his head. He needed a plan, a way to fight back. But what could he do, trapped in quarantine? He looked around the room, searching for anything that might be of use. He saw a small comm unit, a medical scanner, and a few personal items. He picked up the comm unit and activated it. He needed to contact someone he could trust. He dialed Benny Alvarez, the station's chef. Benny was a kind and jovial man, always ready with a joke or a comforting word. He was also fiercely loyal, and Aris trusted him implicitly. "Benny, it's Aris," he said, his voice low. "I need your help." "Aris, what's wrong?" Benny asked, his voice filled with concern. "I heard you were in quarantine. What happened?" "I'm infected, Benny," Aris said, "but I'm not going to let it control me. I need you to do something for me." "Anything, Aris," Benny said. "Just name it." "I need you to find out what's really going on down here," Aris said. "I don't think this infection is just a random occurrence. I think there's something more to it, something someone is hiding." "What do you mean?" Benny asked. "I don't know for sure," Aris said, "but I have a feeling that Tanaka is involved. He's always been secretive, always lurking in the shadows. I think he knows more than he's letting on." "Tanaka," Benny said, his voice surprised. "I don't know Aris, he seems like a nice guy." "Don't be fooled, Benny," Aris said. "He's dangerous. I need you to investigate him to find out what he's been up to. Can you do that?" "I can try," Benny said, "but I don't know where to start." "Start with his quarters," Aris said. "See if you can find anything suspicious. And be careful, Benny. He's not someone you want to cross." "I will," Benny said. "I promise you, Aris, I'll find out the truth." Aris disconnected the comm unit, a sliver of hope flickering in his chest. He had an ally on the outside, someone who could uncover the secrets that were hidden within the station. He lay back on the bunk, closing his eyes. He needed to rest, to conserve his strength. He knew the fight against the infection would be long and arduous. But he was ready. He was Aris Thorn, and he wouldn't give up. He would fight the pressure, he would fight the darkness, and he would fight for his survival. He drifted off to sleep, his mind filled with images of Ingrid, of Benny, and of the creature in the abyss. He knew the coming days would be the most challenging of his life, but he was determined to face them head-on, with courage and resolve. The whispers continued to echo in his dreams, but he refused to listen. He was Aris Thorn, and he would not be broken. Chapter 7: Secrets in the Galley. Benny Alvarez wiped his brow with a grease-stained rag, the aroma of recycled protein paste doing little to inspire his culinary creativity. He glanced at the chronometer. Lunch service was over, most of the crew having already choked down their rations. It was the perfect time to put Aris's plan into motion. He muttered a quick prayer to Saint Martha, patron saint of cooks, for forgiveness and guidance. Benny wasn't a spy. He was a chef, a man of the kitchen, not of intrigue. But Aris was his friend, and if Aris believed Tanaka was involved in something nefarious, Benny would do everything in his power to help. He grabbed a utility cart, loading it with cleaning supplies and a toolbox. He hummed a jaunty tune as he made his way towards Tanaka's quarters, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. Tanaka's quarters were located on a lower level, near the engineering section. Benny had only been down there a few times, and he always felt a sense of unease in that part of the station. It was dark, cramped, and filled with the constant hum of machinery. He reached Tanaka's door and knocked softly. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. Benny glanced around nervously. No one was watching. He pulled out a lock pick from his toolbox, a skill he had learned during his less than reputable youth. He inserted the pick into the lock, wiggling it gently. A few clicks later, the door sprung open. He pushed the door open cautiously and stepped inside. Tanaka's quarters were small and Spartan, reflecting the technician's quiet and reserved nature. A narrow bunk, a small desk, and a few storage lockers comprised the entirety of the furnishings. Benny closed the door behind him and activated his flashlight. He began to search the room, starting with the desk. He rifled through Tanaka's papers, finding mostly technical manuals and schematics. Nothing suspicious. He moved on to the storage lockers, opening them one by one. He found a few changes of clothes, some personal hygiene items, and a collection of electronic components. Again, nothing out of the ordinary. Benny was beginning to lose hope. Maybe Aris was wrong. Maybe Tanaka was just a quiet, hard-working technician. He reached the last locker, located at the back of the room. It was locked. Benny smiled. Now we're getting somewhere, he thought. He pulled out his lock pick again and went to work. This lock was more complicated than the first, but Benny was undeterred. He wiggled the pick, twisted it, and applied pressure. After a few minutes of tense concentration, the lock clicked open. He opened the locker and gasped. Inside, he found a hidden compartment filled with contraband. There were stacks of credits, several vials of unknown substances, and a sophisticated communication device. Benny picked up the communication device, examining it closely. It was far more advanced than the station's standard comm units, capable of transmitting and receiving signals over vast distances. He activated the device, the screen flickering to life. He saw a series of encrypted messages addressed to someone named Silas. Benny didn't know who Silas was, but he had a feeling he wasn't a friend of the station. He scrolled through the messages, trying to decipher their meaning. He saw references to deliveries, payments, and the package. He also saw a series of coordinates pointing to a location deep within the Mariana Trench. Benny's blood ran cold. He knew what this meant. Tanaka was a smuggler, and he was using Station Tritan as a base of operations. He was delivering something to someone down in the trench, something that was worth a lot of money. But what was the package, and who was Silas? He continued to search the locker, finding a small data chip hidden beneath the communication device. He inserted the chip into his own comm unit and downloaded the data. The data chip contained a series of files, including photographs, schematics, and audio recordings. Benny began to review the files, his eyes widening in shock. The photographs showed images of the approaching object, the creature that Aris had fought in the abyss. The schematics detailed the creature's anatomy, its weaknesses, and its capabilities. The audio recordings contained conversations between Tanaka and Silas, discussing the creature and its potential value. Benny realized the horrifying truth. Tanaka wasn't just a smuggler. He was a bioengineer, and he had created the creature. He had unleashed it upon the station, and he was planning to sell it to sealers for a fortune. Benny felt a surge of anger. He had to stop Tanaka before he could do any more damage. He had to warn the others to expose his treachery. He gathered the evidence, carefully replacing everything in the locker. He closed the locker, locking it securely. He turned off the flashlight and made his way towards the door. He reached the door and hesitated. He had the evidence, but he didn't know who to trust. Lee was the captain, but she was also under a lot of pressure. What if she didn't believe him? What if she was already infected? He decided to trust Aris. Aris was in quarantine, but he was still thinking clearly. He would know what to do. He opened the door and stepped out into the corridor. He turned to lock the door when he heard a noise. He turned around and saw Tanaka standing behind him, his face grim. "What are you doing here, Benny?" Tanaka asked, his voice cold and menacing. Benny swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He was caught. Just cleaning up," Benny stammered, holding up his utility cart. "I saw the door was open, so I thought I'd tidy up a bit." Tanaka didn't believe him. Benny could see it in his eyes. "You were snooping, weren't you?" Tanaka said, taking a step closer. "You were looking for something." No, I swear," Benny said, backing away. "I wasn't looking for anything." Tanaka lunged at him, grabbing him by the throat. Benny gasped for air, his vision blurring. "You shouldn't have done that, Benny," Tanaka said, his grip tightening. "Now you're going to pay the price." Benny struggled against Tanaka's grip, but he was no match for the technician's strength. He felt his life slipping away, his body growing numb. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. He had tried to do the right thing, but he had failed. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, he heard a gunshot. Tanaka released his grip, his body slumping to the floor. Benny gasped for air, his hands trembling. He looked up and saw Eva Ristova standing over Tanaka's body, a smoking gun in her hand. Her eyes were wide and vacant, her face devoid of emotion. "It's done," she said, her voice hollow. "He won't hurt anyone anymore." Benny stared at her, his mind reeling. What had happened to her? What had she become? He knew one thing for sure. The station was no longer safe. Everyone was a suspect, and no one could be trusted. Chapter 8: Broken Trust. Benny stared at Eva, the smoking gun still clutched in her hand. The scene swam before his eyes, the recycled air thick with the metallic tang of blood. He'd known Eva for years. She'd always been a little eccentric, lost in her world of deep-sea biology, but never this. "Eva," he croaked, his throat raw from Tanaka's attack. What did you do?" Her eyes, usually bright with scientific curiosity, were now dull like polished stones. "He was a threat," she said, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. "He had to be eliminated." "A threat? He was just Tanaka," Benny stammered, scrambling backwards until he hit the wall. He instinctively clutched the data chip hidden in his pocket, the weight a small comfort in the face of this unfolding nightmare. "He created the creature," Eva stated, as if reciting a scientific observation. "He intended to weaponize it. He jeopardized the station, the crew. His actions were unacceptable. Benny struggled to reconcile the Eva he knew with this cold, calculating figure. The infection, it had twisted her, amplified her scientific detachment into something monstrous. But murder, Eva. This isn't you, Benny pleaded, his voice trembling. She tilted her head, studying him with unsettling scrutiny. Is it not? Perhaps you never truly knew me, Benny. Perhaps I was always destined for this. A chill ran down Benny's spine. He had to get out of here, had to warn the others. But how could he escape with Eva standing between him and the corridor? "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. I need to tell the captain," Benny stammered, trying to sound convincing. "About Tanaka, about everything." Eva's expression hardened. The captain is compromised. She cannot be trusted. "Compromised? What are you talking about?" Benny asked, his fear growing. "She is resisting," Eva explained, her voice laced with a hint of impatience. "But the infection is taking hold. She will soon embrace the change, whether she wishes it or not." Benny's mind raced. If Eva was right, if Lee was infected, then the entire station was on the brink of collapse. He was alone, trapped in a metal coffin with a killer and a crew spiraling into madness. "Then I need to warn someone," Benny insisted, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to tell Dr. Sharma or someone who can help." Eva shook her head. "There is no help, Benny. There is only acceptance. Join us. Embrace the pressure. Become one with the deep." She took a step towards him, her hand outstretched. Benny recoiled, his back pressed against the cold metal wall. "No," he said, his voice firm despite his fear. "I won't let you do this. I won't let you turn me into one of those things." Eva sighed, her expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "Then I have no choice," she said, raising the gun. Benny closed his eyes, bracing for the end, but the gunshot never came. Instead, he heard a groan, followed by a thud. He opened his eyes and saw Eva collapsing to the floor, a dart protruding from her neck. He looked up and saw Mac O'Connell standing in the doorway, a dart gun in his hand. "Benny, are you all right?" Mac asked, his voice strained. Benny nodded, his legs trembling. "Mac, you saved me." Mac rushed over to him, helping him to his feet. "I saw you two heading down here," Mac explained, his eyes darting nervously. "I had a bad feeling. I'm glad I came." He looked down at Eva's body, his expression grim. "What happened here, Benny?" Benny took a deep breath and began to explain everything, from Aris's suspicions about Tanaka to the discovery of the hidden compartment to Eva's chilling confession. As he spoke, Mac's face grew increasingly pale. This is insane," Mac stammered when Benny had finished. "The whole station is going to hell." "What do we do, Mac?" Benny asked, his voice desperate. "Who can we trust?" Mac hesitated, his eyes filled with doubt. "I don't know, Benny. I just don't know. It might be too late for all of us. We need to get out of here, Benny, before things get worse. Head to the escape pods while I cause a distraction and try to reach help." "What about Aris? We can't leave without him," Benny replied desperately to Mac. "I am sorry, Benny. We can't save him. If you care for your life, go now." "All right, Mac. Farewell," Benny replied with tears in his eyes. Benny and Mac leave to the opposite sides for their survival. Chapter 9. The Last Stand and Final Transmission. The escape pod bay was a claustrophobic chamber located on the outer hull of the station, designed for emergency evacuations. Benny stumbled towards it, his heart pounding in his chest. The station was groaning under the strain, the creaks and vibrations growing louder with each passing moment. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the metal walls. He reached the escape pod bay and punched in the access code, his fingers trembling. The door hissed open, revealing a row of cramped, cylindrical pods. He climbed into the nearest pod, sealing himself inside. The pod was small and uncomfortable, but it was his only chance of survival. He strapped himself into the acceleration couch and began the launch sequence. The pod rumbled to life, the engines sputtering and coughing. He glanced at the viewport, his eyes widening in horror. He saw the approaching object, the creature that Aris had fought in the abyss. It was massive, its form looming large in the darkness. It was headed straight for the station. He slammed his fist against the launch button, desperate to escape before it was too late. The pod shuddered violently, then lurched forward. He was launched into the darkness, hurtling away from the station at breakneck speed. He watched as the creature collided with Station Tritan, the impact sending shockwaves through the water. The station crumbled, its lights extinguished one by one. It was a tomb, a monument to human ambition and folly. Benny closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He had survived, but at what cost? He had lost his friends, his home, his hope. He was alone in the abyss, adrift in a metal coffin. He didn't know where he was going or what he would find. All he knew was that he had to keep going, to keep fighting for his survival. Back at the station, Lee was in a desperate combat inside the Station Tritan, with all the members who were infected by the creature. Mac died while trying to active the self-destruction sequence of the station, but he failed to do it. But he succeeded on distracting the infected members for Lee to escape. Lee heads to the communication hub of the station to try to contact the surface for a final transmission. With the station nearly collapsing, Lee connects to the communication system and tries to reach the surface. "This is Captain Jian Lee of Station Tritan," she said, her voice strained but clear. "If anyone is receiving this, please respond. We are under attack. The station is collapsing. We need immediate assistance." Static crackled in her ear, followed by a faint voice. "Captain Lee, this is Surface Command. We read you. What is the nature of the attack?" "We are being attacked by an unknown creature," Lee said. "It is a bioengineered weapon created by one of our own crew members. It has infected the station, turning the crew into monsters." "Monsters," the voice repeated, incredulous. "What are you talking about, Captain?" "I don't have time to explain," Lee said. "The station is about to be destroyed. I need you to send a rescue team to contain this infection before it spreads to the surface." "We will do what we can, Captain," the voice said. but we cannot guarantee a successful rescue. The Mariana Trench is a dangerous place, and we do not fully understand the nature of this threat. Just try, Lee pleaded. Please, for the sake of humanity, don't let this infection spread. The line went dead, leaving Lee in silence. She knew it was a long shot, but she had to try. She had to warn the surface to give them a chance to prepare. She looked around the communication hub, her eyes filled with sorrow. This was the end. The station was collapsing, and she was the only one left. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. She thought of her family, of her friends, of all the people she had sworn to protect. She had failed them. She had failed to save the station. But she had done everything she could. She had fought to the very end. A powerful energy take control of her, turning her completely to the other side. She opened her eyes. A sinister smile took control of her face. The beginning is now, the entity with Lee body said with a monstrous voice. The station was torn into pieces, along with the monstrous version of Lee who exploded into the deep. Now the infection was free to roam around the ocean for unknown time. The end.